Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he finished loading the last box onto his delivery truck. Another long day of minimum wage work stretched ahead of him. 3 years ago, he had been the head of marketing at Thompson Industries, earning 6 figures and living in a penthouse apartment. Now he delivered packages for $12 an hour and lived in a cramped studio apartment on the wrong side of town. The memory still stung like a fresh wound. Victoria Thompson, the ice-cold CEO who had destroyed his career with a single accusation. She claimed he had stolen confidential client information and sold it to competitors. The evidence was fabricated, but it was convincing enough to not only get him fired but also blacklisted from the entire industry. No other marketing firm would touch him after that scandal. Marcus had tried to fight back, hiring lawyers and demanding investigations. But Victoria Thompson wielded too much power. Her company was worth billions and she had connections everywhere. His savings disappeared into legal fees, and eventually he had to accept that his old life was over. The woman had crushed him completely, taking away everything he had worked for since graduating college. Now he drove through the wealthy neighborhoods where he used to live, delivering packages to people who probably earned in a week what he made in 3 months. The irony was not lost on him. He parked his truck near Riverside Park, checking his delivery schedule on the cracked screen of his phone. 2 more stops, then he could head home to his empty apartment and microwaved dinner. The park was busy that afternoon. Families spread blankets under oak trees while children ran between playgrounds. Marcus remembered bringing his nephew here, years ago, back when he could afford to take time off work for family visits. Those days felt like someone else's life now. He was walking back to his truck when he heard the screaming, high-pitched, terrified voices that made his blood run cold. 2 young girls, maybe 8 and 10 years old, were running toward the parking lot as fast as their small legs could carry them. Behind them, a man in dark clothes was chasing them, his intentions clearly sinister. Without thinking, Marcus dropped his clipboard and sprinted toward the girls. The older one stumbled and fell, skinning her knee on the concrete path. Her younger sister stopped to help her, tears streaming down both their faces as the stranger closed the distance between them. Marcus reached them just as the man lunged forward. He grabbed the stranger by his jacket and spun him around, putting himself between the predator and the children. The man was bigger than Marcus expected, with cold eyes and rough hands that spoke of violence. The fight was brief, but brutal. The stranger threw a punch that caught Marcus in the ribs, knocking the wind out of him. But Marcus had grown up in a rough neighborhood before his corporate success, and those old instincts kicked in. He landed a solid hit to the man's jaw, then another to his stomach that doubled him over. Other park visitors had noticed the commotion and were calling 911. The stranger realized he was surrounded and outnumbered. He cursed at Marcus, spat blood on the ground, then ran toward the parking lot where a van was waiting. The vehicle sped away before anyone could get the license plate number. Marcus knelt beside the 2 girls, his hands shaking with adrenaline. The older girl was still crying from her scraped knee while her little sister clung to her arm. Both children had the same dark hair and green eyes, clearly sisters from a well-to-do family based on their expensive clothes and shoes. People gathered around them, offering help and asking if the girls were okay. Someone had called for an ambulance and police. Marcus stayed with the children, speaking gently to calm them down while they waited for help to arrive. He told them silly jokes and asked about their favorite cartoon characters, anything to distract them from what had just happened. The little girl, who said her name was Emma, looked up at Marcus with wide eyes full of gratitude. Her older sister, Sophie, managed a shaky smile despite her tears. They both seemed to trust him completely, holding onto his hands as if he was their anchor in a storm. Marcus felt something he had not experienced in years: purpose. For the first time since losing his career, he had done something that truly mattered. He had protected 2 innocent children from a terrible fate, and nothing else in the world felt more important than that moment. The police arrived within minutes, followed by paramedics who cleaned Sophie's scraped knee and checked both girls for other injuries. The officers took statements from witnesses and praised Marcus for his quick thinking and bravery. They said his actions had likely prevented a kidnapping or worse. As the crowd began to disperse, Marcus noticed a black luxury sedan racing into the parking lot. The car barely stopped before a woman jumped out, her face pale with terror and relief. She had the same green eyes as the girls, and they ran to her immediately, crying "Mommy," as she wrapped them in her arms. The woman held her daughters close, tears streaming down her face as she whispered reassurances that they were safe, now. She was elegantly dressed in a business suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. Her dark hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, and even in her emotional state, she carried herself with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. Marcus watched the reunion from a distance, feeling satisfied that the girls were back, with their family. He was about to return to his truck when the woman looked up and their eyes met across the parking lot. For a moment, the world seemed to stop spinning as recognition dawned on both their faces. It was Victoria Thompson. The woman who had destroyed his life was the mother of the 2 children he had just saved. Victoria Thompson froze when she saw Marcus standing near the police cars. The same man she had destroyed 3 years ago was now the hero who had saved her most precious treasures. Her daughters were still clinging to her, babbling about how the brave man had fought off the bad person who tried to take them away. Marcus felt his stomach drop as the reality of the situation hit him. Of all the children in the city, of all the parks where this could have happened, fate had put him in the path of Victoria Thompson's daughters. The woman who had taken everything from him now owed him a debt she could never repay. The police officer approached Victoria to get her statement as the legal guardian. She answered his questions while keeping her eyes on her daughters, but Marcus could see her stealing glances in his direction. Her face showed a mixture of gratitude and something that might have been shame, though she tried to hide it behind her usual mask of cold professionalism. Sophie and Emma kept talking about their hero, describing how he had appeared like a superhero, just when they needed him most. They pointed at Marcus repeatedly, wanting their mother to meet the man who had saved them. Victoria had no choice but to walk over to him, her daughters pulling her by the hands. Marcus considered walking away. Every instinct told him to get back in his delivery truck and drive off before this situation became more complicated. But something about the innocent faces of the 2 little girls kept his feet planted on the concrete. They deserved to know that their hero cared about what happened to them, even if their mother was his worst enemy. Victoria approached slowly, as if she was walking toward a bomb that might explode at any moment. Her daughters ran ahead and hugged Marcus around his legs, thanking him over and over for keeping them safe. The genuine affection from the children created an awkward contrast with the tension between the adults. Marcus knelt down to the girls, level, ignoring Victoria completely as he spoke to them. He asked if they were feeling better and reminded them to stay close to their mother in crowded places. His voice was gentle and caring, the same tone he had used to calm them during the crisis. The children hung on his every word like he was the most important person in the world. Victoria cleared her throat, struggling to find the right words. The woman who commanded boardrooms full of powerful executives and negotiated million-dollar deals was speechless in front of a delivery driver she had wronged. Finally, she managed to speak in a voice that was barely above a whisper. She thanked him for saving her daughters, calling his actions heroic and selfless. Her words sounded formal and rehearsed, like she was giving a prepared statement to the media, but her eyes told a different story. For the first time since Marcus had known her, Victoria Thompson looked vulnerable and uncertain. Marcus stood up and looked directly at her, his expression unreadable. He could have said many things in that moment. He could have thrown her past. Actions in her face demanded an explanation for what she had done to him, or used this opportunity to make her feel as powerless as he had felt. Instead, he simply nodded and said that any decent person would have done the same thing. The police officer called Victoria over to sign some paperwork and get contact information in case they needed to reach the family later. While she was busy with the legal details, Marcus said goodbye to Sophie and Emma. He told them to be brave and listen to their mother, then started walking toward his delivery truck. Emma called out to him, asking if they would see him again. The question hit Marcus like a punch to the chest. These innocent children had no idea about the history between their mother and the man who had just risked his life for them. All they knew was that someone had protected them when they were in danger, and now he was walking away. Marcus turned back and promised the girls that they would meet again someday. It was a lie, but a kind one. He had no intention of ever crossing paths with Victoria Thompson again, even if it meant disappointing her daughters. Some wounds were too deep to heal, even when circumstances demanded forgiveness. As he drove away from the park, Marcus caught sight of Victoria in his rearview mirror. She was holding her daughters close while watching his truck disappear into traffic. There was something in her posture that suggested she wanted to run after him, to say something more than the formal thanks she had managed earlier. The rest of Marcus's delivery route passed in a blur. He mechanically loaded and unloaded packages, while his mind replayed every moment of the encounter. The irony was overwhelming. The woman who had cost him his career, his home, and his future was now in his debt in the most profound way possible. Her children were safe because of his actions. That night, Marcus sat in his small apartment eating leftover pizza and staring at the local news on his secondhand television. The story of the attempted kidnapping was the lead item, complete with interviews from witnesses and praise from the police department. They showed his delivery truck in the background of the footage, but thankfully no one had gotten a clear shot of his face. The reporter mentioned that the children belonged to Victoria Thompson, CEO of Thompson Industries, one of the city's most successful companies. They called her a prominent businesswoman and devoted mother, painting her as the sympathetic victim of a random crime. There was no mention of her ruthless business practices or the lives she had destroyed on her way to the top. Marcus turned off the television and tried to sleep, but his mind would not stop racing. He kept thinking about the way Sophie and Emma had looked at him, with complete trust and admiration. They saw him as their hero, someone who had risked everything to keep them safe. The irony was that their mother had once seen him as a threat, to be eliminated. For 3 years, Marcus had fantasized about getting revenge on Victoria Thompson. He had imagined scenarios where she would lose everything the way he had, where she would understand what it felt like to have your life destroyed by someone else's greed and ambition. But now that fate had given him leverage over her, he felt empty instead of triumphant. The children changed everything. Sophie and Emma were innocent victims of their mother's actions, just like Marcus had been. They deserved to feel safe and loved, regardless of what Victoria had done in the past. Using them as weapons against their mother would make Marcus no better than the woman who had destroyed his career. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Marcus made a decision. He would not seek revenge against Victoria Thompson, no matter how much she deserved it. But he also would not forgive her or pretend that the past had been erased by one afternoon in the park. Some debts could never be paid, even with a life saved. 3 days after the incident at the park, Marcus was surprised to find a black sedan following his delivery truck. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but the expensive car stayed several vehicles behind him for over an hour, matching his stops and turns. When he finally pulled into a gas station, the sedan parked across the street. Victoria Thompson stepped out of the driver's seat, looking nothing like the polished CEO he remembered. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the dark circles under her eyes and the worried expression that had replaced her usual confident demeanor. She approached him hesitantly while he filled his tank, clearly struggling with what to say. Marcus continued pumping gas and checking his phone, pretending not to notice her until she was standing just a few feet away. The tension between them was thick enough to cut with a knife. Victoria started by apologizing for following him, explaining that she had hired a private investigator to find out who he was after the police gave her only basic information. She said she needed to talk to him about what happened at the park, that her daughters had not stopped asking about their hero for 3 straight days. Marcus finished with the gas pump and faced her directly for the first time since that awful day. In her office 3 years ago, she looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than the woman who had destroyed his career with cold calculation. But he reminded himself that Victoria Thompson was an expert at manipulation, and this vulnerable act could be just another business strategy. She told him about Sophie and Emma's nightmares since the attempted kidnapping. Both girls were afraid to leave the house, jumping at every strange noise and refusing to play in their backyard alone. The only thing that seemed to comfort them was talking about the brave man who had saved them. But they were heartbroken that he had disappeared from their lives. Marcus listened without showing any emotion, though internally he felt torn apart by the description of the children's trauma. He had hoped they would bounce back quickly from the incident, the way kids usually do. Learning that they were still suffering made his chest tight with concern and anger at the predator who had targeted them. Victoria's voice cracked as she described trying to explain to her daughters why their hero had to go back to work and could not visit them. She said Emma had asked if the bad man had hurt their protector, and Sophie wanted to know if they had done something wrong to make him leave. The questions had broken Victoria's heart in ways she never expected. Then Victoria surprised Marcus by addressing their shared history directly. She acknowledged that she knew who he was and what she had done to him 3 years ago. Her voice was barely audible as she admitted that her actions had been wrong, that she had destroyed an innocent man's life to protect her own interests. Marcus felt his anger rising as she spoke. The admission was too little and far too late. Where was this conscience when she was fabricating evidence and bribing witnesses to frame him? Where was this regret when he was losing his home and struggling to find work that would pay his basic bills? Victoria continued, explaining that she had discovered the truth about the stolen client information months after firing him. Her head of security had been the real culprit, selling confidential data to competitors for years while covering his tracks by framing other employees. She had quietly fired the man and implemented new security measures, but by then Marcus had already disappeared into the city's anonymity. She claimed she had tried to find him to make things right, but Marcus had changed his address and phone number after losing his apartment. Her private investigators had failed to locate him, and eventually she had convinced herself that he had probably landed on his feet somewhere else. It was easier to believe that than to face the magnitude of what she had done to an innocent person. Marcus laughed bitterly at her story. If she had really wanted to find him, her resources could have tracked him down within days. The truth was that she had not tried very hard because his suffering was not her priority. She had been content to let him remain destroyed as long as her company's reputation stayed protected. Victoria flinched at his harsh assessment, but did not deny it. She said she had compartmentalized his situation, focusing on her business and her family while pushing guilt about Marcus into the back of her mind. She admitted it was cowardly and selfish, but at the time it felt like the only way to move forward. Now, watching her daughters struggle with trauma while praising the man she had wronged, Victoria could no longer ignore the weight of her past actions. The irony was devastating. The person her children saw as their guardian angel was the same man she had cast out like garbage when it suited her purposes. Marcus studied her face as she spoke, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But Victoria's distress seemed genuine, her regret too raw to be fabricated. She was not the ice-cold executive he remembered. Motherhood and guilt had transformed her into someone who actually appeared human. Still, Marcus was not ready to offer forgiveness or absolution. Pretty words and tears could not undo 3 years of poverty, isolation, and humiliation. Victoria had taken away his identity and his future, forcing him to rebuild his entire life from nothing. Her daughter's trauma was heartbreaking, but it did not erase his own suffering. Victoria seemed to understand his position without him saying a word. She did not ask for forgiveness or try to justify her past behavior further. Instead, she made a different kind of request. She asked if he would consider meeting with Sophie and Emma one more time, just to help them process what had happened and understand that he was safe. Marcus was torn between his desire to help the children and his need to protect himself from further involvement with Victoria Thompson. The girls had done nothing wrong, but their mother remained the woman who had nearly destroyed him. Getting closer to this family felt like walking into a trap, even if his intentions were good. Victoria promised it would be just one meeting, somewhere public and brief. She said she would pay him for his time if money would help convince him. The offer of payment was insulting, as if his heroic actions were just another business transaction she could resolve with cash. Marcus told her he would think about it, but his tone made it clear that his answer would probably be no. He got back in his delivery truck and drove away, leaving Victoria standing alone in the gas station parking lot with tears streaming down her face. That night, Marcus could not stop thinking about Sophie and Emma having nightmares and being afraid to play outside. He had saved them from physical danger, but the emotional scars were proving harder to heal. Part of him wanted to help them feel safe again, regardless of how much he despised their mother. Against his better judgment, Marcus agreed to meet with Sophie and Emma at a neutral location. Victoria had suggested a family restaurant downtown, somewhere public with plenty of witnesses in case things went wrong. Marcus insisted that the meeting would last exactly 1 hour, and that Victoria would stay out of their conversation unless the children directly addressed her. When he arrived at the restaurant, Marcus found the girls sitting in a corner booth with their mother. Sophie and Emma spotted him immediately, and their faces lit up with joy. They scrambled out of their seats and ran to hug him, talking excitedly about how worried they had been that something bad had happened to him. Victoria watched the reunion from the booth, her expression a mixture of gratitude and pain. Seeing her daughter so happy to reconnect with Marcus only emphasized how much damage she had done to this good man. The children trusted him completely, while she had spent years treating him like an enemy to be destroyed. Marcus sat down with the girls and ordered them ice cream while Victoria moved to a table across the restaurant, giving them space to talk privately. Sophie and Emma told him about their nightmares and fears, asking innocent questions about why bad people existed and whether the scary man might come back to hurt them. He answered their questions as honestly as possible without frightening them. Further, Marcus explained that most people in the world were good and kind, but sometimes bad people did exist, and that was why it was important to stay close to trusted adults. He assured them that their mother would always protect them, and that they were safe now. Emma asked why Marcus had been so brave when the bad man was chasing them. She wanted to know if he had been scared and how he knew exactly what to do. Her innocent curiosity about his heroic actions made Marcus uncomfortable, since he had simply reacted on instinct without thinking about consequences or danger. Marcus told the girls that being brave did not mean not being afraid. He explained that real courage meant doing the right thing even when you were scared, and that helping people who needed protection was always worth the risk. He said anyone would have done the same thing in his position, though the children disagreed emphatically. Sophie, who was older and more observant than her sister, asked why Marcus had seemed sad when he left them at the park. She said his eyes looked hurt, like someone had been mean to him before he became their hero. The question caught Marcus off guard, and he struggled to find an appropriate answer for a child. He told Sophie that sometimes adults had complicated problems that children did not need to worry about. Marcus said the important thing was that he had been in the right place at the right time to help them, and that meeting them had actually made him feel much better about everything. It was not entirely a lie. The girls spent the next 40 minutes telling Marcus about their school, their friends, and their favorite activities. They drew pictures for him on napkins and made him promise to keep the artwork forever. Emma showed him a loose tooth that was almost ready to fall out, while Sophie described the science project she was working on for her class. Their innocent chatter and genuine affection began to chip away at the wall of anger Marcus had built around his heart. These children saw only goodness in the world, despite their recent trauma. They believed that people were fundamentally decent and that heroes existed to protect those who could not protect themselves. As their time together drew to a close, Emma asked the question Marcus had been dreading. She wanted to know when they would see him again, if he could come to their house for dinner or if they could visit him at work. Her hopeful expression made it clear that she expected their relationship to continue growing. Marcus glanced across the restaurant at Victoria, who was pretending to read a magazine while obviously listening to every word of their conversation. He could see the tension in her shoulders and the way her hands gripped the table. She knew this moment would determine whether her daughters would be disappointed again. He told the girls gently that he had a very busy job that required him to travel to different parts of the city every day. Marcus explained that he might not be able to see them regularly, but that did not mean he did not care about them. He promised to think of them often, and hoped they would remember to be brave and kind like they had been that day at the park. Sophie looked confused and hurt by his evasive answer. She asked directly if he did not want to be their friend anymore, if they had done something wrong to make him want to stay away. The question broke Marcus's heart, especially when he saw tears forming in both girls' eyes. Marcus assured them that they had done nothing wrong and that meeting them had been one of the best things to happen to him in years. He said sometimes grown-ups had complicated situations that made friendships difficult, but that did not change how much he cared about them or how proud he was of their bravery. Emma wiped her eyes and asked if the complicated situation involved her mother. The question was so perceptive that Marcus was stunned into silence. This 8-year-old had somehow sensed the tension between the adults, even though they had tried to hide it from the children. Before Marcus could answer, Sophie chimed in with her own observation. She said her mother had been acting strange since the park incident, crying when she thought the girls were not looking and making phone calls in private. Sophie wondered if their mother had done something to upset Marcus before he saved them. The children's insight was both impressive and heartbreaking. They could sense that their hero was connected to their mother's distress, but they had no way to understand the full complexity of the situation. Marcus realized that Victoria's guilt was affecting the entire family, not just him. He chose his words carefully, telling the girls that their mother was a good person who loved them very much. Marcus said that adults sometimes made mistakes in their work that hurt other people's feelings, but that did not mean they were bad people. He emphasized that their mother's love for them was real and strong, regardless of any other problems. Emma nodded solemnly and said she hoped the adult problems would get fixed soon, so that Marcus could visit them more often. Sophie added that she wanted to invite him to her birthday party next month, but only if the grown-up complications were resolved by then. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, both girls hugged Marcus tightly and made him promise to take care of himself. They said they would pray for him every night and hoped that whatever was making him sad would get better. Their genuine concern for his well-being was almost too much for Marcus to bear. Victoria approached their table as the children gathered, their coats. She thanked Marcus quietly for spending time with her daughters and for helping them feel safe again. Her voice was thick with emotion, and she seemed to be holding back tears as she watched how much her children loved this man she had wronged. 2 weeks after the restaurant meeting, Marcus found an envelope slipped under his apartment door. Inside was a handwritten letter from Victoria Thompson, along with a cashier's check for more money than he had seen in 3 years. The letter was 5 pages long, written in careful script that spoke of multiple drafts and sleepless nights. Victoria's letter contained the full truth about what had happened at Thompson Industries. She detailed how her head of security, Robert Kane, had been selling client information to competitors for over 2 years. When the board of directors discovered the breach, they demanded immediate action and threatened to remove Victoria from her position if she could not identify the culprit quickly. Kane had expertly framed Marcus by planting evidence on his computer and in his office files. He had access to all security systems and knew exactly how to make the frame-up look convincing. Victoria admitted that she had been so desperate to protect her position and her company that she had not looked closely enough at the evidence before destroying Marcus's career. The letter revealed that Victoria had discovered Kane's guilt 6 months after firing Marcus. A routine audit had uncovered financial irregularities that led directly back to the security chief. When confronted, Kane had confessed to the thefts and revealed how he had framed innocent employees to cover his tracks. Marcus was not his first victim. Victoria described the horror she felt upon learning the truth. She had destroyed the career of an innocent man to protect herself from a crime she had not even committed. Her guilt had eaten away at her for years, but she had convinced herself that Marcus was probably doing well somewhere else, and that digging up the past would only cause more pain. She admitted that her attempts to find Marcus had been half-hearted, at best. The private investigators she hired had given up too easily, and she had not pushed them to try harder. Victoria acknowledged that part of her had not wanted to face Marcus and confront the magnitude of her mistake. It was easier to let him remain lost than to face the consequences of her actions. The letter went on to describe how becoming a single mother had changed Victoria's perspective on justice and responsibility. Her divorce 2 years earlier had forced her to examine her priorities and the kind of person she wanted to be for her daughters. She realized that her ruthless business practices had created real victims, people whose lives mattered just as much as her own success. Victoria wrote about watching Marcus with Sophie and Emma, seeing the kind of man she had destroyed. His gentleness with her daughters, his selfless heroism, and his refusal to use their gratitude against her had shown Victoria the true measure of his character. She finally understood what she had taken away from him and from the world. The check, enclosed with the letter, represented 3 years of the salary Marcus should have earned, plus bonuses and benefits he would have received. Victoria had also included money for the legal fees he had spent trying to clear his name, estimated interest on his losses, and additional compensation for the pain and suffering her actions had caused. But the letter made clear that Victoria knew money could not undo the damage she had done. She could not give Marcus back the 3 years of his life he had spent struggling in poverty and isolation. She could not restore his reputation in the marketing industry, or rebuild the professional relationships she had destroyed with her lies. Victoria offered to do whatever was necessary to clear Marcus's name publicly. She was prepared to issue press releases, contact every company that had refused to hire him, and personally recommend him to potential employers. She would testify in court if he wanted to pursue legal action against Thompson Industries, even if it cost her everything she had built. The most surprising part of the letter was Victoria's resignation from Thompson Industries. She had stepped down as CEO the previous week, citing personal reasons and the need to focus on her family. Victoria wrote that she could no longer run a company built on the foundation of destroying an innocent man's career. Her conscience would not allow her to profit from such injustice. She had turned control of the company over to her former vice president, a man Marcus remembered as honest and competent. Victoria planned to start fresh in a different field, somewhere her past mistakes could not continue to haunt her. She wanted to find work that involved helping people, rather than stepping on them to reach the top. The letter ended with an apology that seemed to come from the depths of Victoria's soul. She begged for Marcus's forgiveness while acknowledging that she had no right to expect it. Victoria wrote that she would understand if he never wanted to see her again, but she hoped he might consider maintaining some relationship with Sophie and Emma, who had grown to love him deeply. Marcus read the letter 3 times before the full impact hit him. Victoria Thompson had given up everything to try to make things right. Her CEO position, her wealth, her status in the community, all sacrificed, in an attempt to atone for what she had done to him. The gesture was so unexpected that he did not know how to process it. The check represented more money than Marcus had thought he would ever see again. With it, he could move back to a decent apartment, buy new clothes, and start rebuilding his life. He could even return to the marketing field if Victoria followed through on her promises to clear his reputation publicly. But Marcus found himself staring at the money with mixed emotions. Part of him wanted to tear up the check and throw it back in Victoria's face. Her wealth could not buy his forgiveness or erase the humiliation he had endured. Another part of him was tempted to cash it immediately and disappear, using her guilt money to start over somewhere far away. The most confusing part of his reaction was the sympathy he felt for Victoria. Giving up her company and her career could not have been easy, even with guilt driving her decision. She was starting over just like he had been forced to do, except her fall from grace was voluntary rather than the result of someone else's cruelty. Marcus thought about Sophie and Emma, who had no idea their mother had resigned from her job to help the man who saved them. The girls would be confused and possibly frightened by such a dramatic change in their family's circumstances. They might blame themselves for their mother's decisions, the way children often do when adults make incomprehensible choices. That night, Marcus called the phone number Victoria had included at the bottom of her letter. She answered on the first ring as if she had been waiting by the phone for days. Her voice was shaky and uncertain, completely different from the confident executive he remembered. Marcus told her he had received her letter and her check. He said he needed time to think about everything she had written and what it meant for all of them. Victoria agreed immediately, saying she would wait as long as necessary for his decision about how to move forward. Before ending the call, Marcus asked about Sophie and Emma. He wanted to know how the girls were handling their mother's career change and whether they were still having nightmares about the park incident. His concern for the children seemed to surprise Victoria, who had expected him to focus on his own situation first. 6 months later, Marcus stood in front of a mirror adjusting his new tie before heading to his first day as marketing director at Henderson Creative Group. Victoria had kept her promise about clearing his reputation, contacting every company that had blacklisted him and personally vouching for his character and abilities. The job offers had started coming within weeks of her public statements. Henderson Creative was a smaller firm than Thompson Industries, but Marcus preferred it that way. The work environment was collaborative rather than cutthroat, and his new colleagues treated him with respect and genuine friendliness. For the first time in years, Marcus felt like he belonged somewhere again. He had cashed Victoria's check after much deliberation, using the money to move into a proper apartment and rebuild his professional wardrobe. The gesture had felt strange, at first like accepting charity from his worst enemy. But Marcus eventually realized that refusing the money would not undo the past, and Victoria's sacrifice to provide it had already cost her everything that mattered to her career. The relationship between Marcus and Victoria had evolved into something neither of them could have predicted. They were not friends exactly, but they were no longer enemies either. The shared concern for Sophie and Emma had created a bridge between them, built on mutual respect rather than forgiveness or romance. Marcus had begun visiting the girls regularly, taking them to movies and museums while Victoria worked at her new job as a social worker for Child Protective Services. The career change had shocked everyone who knew her, but Victoria seemed genuinely committed to helping vulnerable children, rather than pursuing corporate profits. Sophie and Emma had adjusted better to their mother's career change than anyone expected. They seemed happier with a mother who came home at reasonable hours and was emotionally present, rather than constantly stressed about corporate deadlines. The girls no longer had nightmares about the park incident, and their trust in the world had been largely restored. During one of his visits, Emma had asked Marcus why their mother seemed so much nicer now than she used to be. The question caught him off guard, but he explained that sometimes people needed to make big changes in their lives to become the person they really wanted to be. Sophie nodded wisely and said she liked this version of their mother much better. Victoria had never directly asked Marcus for forgiveness during their careful interactions over the past months. She seemed to understand that some wounds were too deep for simple apologies, and that trust had to be rebuilt through actions rather than words. Instead, she focused on being the best mother possible and proving through her daily choices that she had genuinely changed. Marcus watched Victoria's transformation with a mixture of skepticism and grudging admiration. The woman who had once destroyed lives without hesitation was now spending her days protecting children from abuse and neglect. Her former colleagues thought she had lost her mind, but Marcus could see the peace in her eyes that had never been there during her corporate success. The turning point in their relationship came when Emma was hospitalized with appendicitis. Marcus received a panicked phone call from Victoria at 2 a.m, asking if he could come to the hospital because Emma was asking for him. He arrived to find Victoria pacing the waiting room, her composure completely shattered by fear for her daughter. Marcus stayed with them through the surgery and recovery, helping to distract Sophie while Emma was in the operating room. When the little girl woke up from anesthesia, the first thing she did was reach for Marcus's hand, saying she knew he would protect her from the scary hospital monsters. The moment broke something loose in his chest that had been frozen for years. Victoria cried quietly as she watched Marcus comfort her daughters, seeing clearly how much the girls had come to love and depend on him. She whispered that she did not deserve to have someone so good in their lives after what she had done to him. Marcus surprised himself by telling her that maybe none of them deserved the good things that happened to them, but that did not make those things less valuable. During Emma's recovery week, Marcus took time off from his new job to help with childcare duties. He read stories to the patient, helped Sophie with her homework, and even cooked dinner for the family when Victoria was too exhausted to function. The domestic routine felt natural and right in ways that surprised everyone involved. One evening, as they sat together watching the girls play a board game, Victoria quietly told Marcus that she finally understood what she had taken from him 3 years ago. It was not just a job, or a salary, or professional standing. She had stolen his ability to trust in justice and fairness, his faith that good people would be protected from those who meant them harm. Marcus was quiet for a long time before responding. He said that maybe she was right about what she had taken from him, but that her daughters had given him something back. Sophie and Emma had restored his belief that heroic actions mattered, that protecting innocent people was worth any personal cost. They had reminded him that goodness existed in the world, even when it was hard to see. Victoria asked if that meant he could ever forgive her for what she had done. Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. He said, "Forgiveness was not something that happened all at once like flipping a switch. It was more like a wound healing slowly, requiring time and the right conditions to mend properly." Marcus explained that he was not ready to say the past was forgotten, or that they could pretend it never happened. But he was willing to continue building something new on the foundation of their shared concern for Sophie and Emma. Maybe that was enough for now. Maybe it was all any of them could realistically expect given their history. The conversation marked a new phase in their relationship, one based on honesty about the past and hope for the future. They would never be the same people they had been before the park incident brought them back together. Victoria would always carry the guilt of what she had done, and Marcus would always remember the pain of being betrayed by someone he had trusted. But they had learned something valuable about second chances and the possibility of redemption. Sometimes the worst moments in life created opportunities for the most meaningful growth. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most could also teach us the most about forgiveness and healing. As Marcus tucked Sophie and Emma into their beds that night, both girls told him they loved him and hoped he would always be part of their family. Emma asked if he would walk her down the aisle at her wedding someday, since she wanted the bravest man she knew to give her away. Sophie requested that he teach her how to be a hero like him when she grew up. Walking to his car afterward, Marcus reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. 3 years ago, Victoria Thompson had destroyed everything he thought he knew about himself and his place in the world. 6 months ago, saving her daughters had forced him to confront the person he wanted to be versus the person his anger was turning him into. Tonight, sitting in that living room with the woman who had once been his worst enemy and the children who had become like family to him, Marcus realized that some stories do not have clear villains and heroes. Sometimes people were capable of both terrible cruelty and remarkable redemption. Sometimes the worst thing that ever happened to you led directly to the best thing that ever happened to you. He was not sure what the future would bring for any of them. Victoria was still rebuilding her life and learning how to be the mother her daughters deserved. Marcus was rediscovering his place in the professional world while navigating his complicated feelings about the family that had both destroyed and saved him. Sophie and Emma were growing up with the knowledge that heroes were real and that good people would always fight to protect them. But for the first time in years, Marcus felt genuine hope about what tomorrow might bring. He had learned that some wounds could heal, that some people could change, and that sometimes the most unlikely circumstances could lead to the most meaningful relationships. The man who had lost everything had found something he never knew he was looking for, and the woman who had once seemed beyond redemption had discovered that it was never too late to become the person you were meant to be.